I'm Scott Allen Miller. This is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. Today, on our Expats of Nicaragua WhatsApp group, there was some questions about it's really hard to get around and discover Nicaragua because it is a relatively physically large country with a lot of varied terrain, and you do want to travel around, especially if you have a family and you're investigating places within the country that you may want to live. And it would be very handy if you had a car to be able to do this, because then you could just throw your family and your luggage into a vehicle, keep things in your vehicle, and travel around. There's lots of reasons why having a permanent vehicle during your stay while investigating, and this could be during a travel stay, or it could be in your early phase of living in the country but you haven't really settled in yet, you're just still investigating more deeply, that this really would be useful. But this brings up some complications because it is difficult to actually acquire a car here in order to do this. Why is that, and what is it that you can do, and what are the alternatives, and could you just drive down and use your own car? We're going to talk about that right after the phone. This is a question and a challenge posed by a lot of people. There's no single person who's having this particular challenge. This is a common one. Pretty much every family who comes down is challenged with this, and my own family is a great example of this. I am with a family of four. It's me and my wife and my two children, and now that we live here, also our two dogs. I think one is behind me here. I think you can see her, and plus my business partner is here. So we have a lot of people that tend to go around the country at any given time, and if we want to see something, like, it's complicated to move around if you don't have a car. Now, I first lived here 10 years ago, right? And we used to live in Granada, which is more central, and we would from time to time rent a car and drive around. We didn't own a car, but renting was relatively approachable, and driving in the country really isn't that bad. I wouldn't recommend it for someone who's just on vacation in most cases. Some people just love to drive, and that's fine. But in general, we don't recommend it for quick visits. But if you're going to live here, of course, driving is probably something you're going to want to do at some point, especially under the circumstances that we're talking about. But this creates some challenges if you're not on an unlimited budget, because rentals here tend to be a bit expensive. Gas here is not the cheapest thing in the world. It's not outrageous, but it's certainly not cheap. It's right now quite a bit higher than the US, but when we first moved here, it's like about 4 years ago, it was about the 80th percentile price in the United States, where like California and Hawaii had like the 100th percentile type thing. So just everything adds up, right? And you got to have insurance. There's a lot of things that you would do in like the United States if you were renting, if you're an American or Canadian, that makes rentals really easy, and here that doesn't always work. Now, some people have reported, and myself included, being here and having time to shop around and figuring out what you're doing, you sometimes can get rentals in the $30 to $35 per day range, which is really not bad at all. But a lot of people, when renting, are going to be much closer to $50 to $100 per day, just because of the size vehicle that they need, or the time that they need it, the availability, or whatever. Now, if you were to buy a vehicle, of course, there's a lot of complications with that, but for a lot of people, that's what makes sense, and that's relatively doable. So it all depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but what we're going to work from is the assumption that you're going to be doing this for a short term, and you don't need to be doing this on the long term. The dog is in the bush. You can kind of see her nose poking out here. I have no idea what she's doing. She doesn't normally do that. She's always in the background of my videos being a goober, but today she's being exceptionally weird. Okay, so we're going to start with this presumption that you're just not here for a really long time. If you're here permanently and you've already made the decision, and you know, like, you're probably going to want to go buy a car if you think you need a car, right? You're going to make the determination, is a car something we need? You'll buy one and then just use that, and then you don't really need this discussion. But for the other people who are either just visiting for quite some time and need, could be weeks, could be months, could even be years, or you're here and you need a car for a while you do this investigation, but then you won't need it after that, which, in all fairness, we had a car for a while. We did a lot of exploring the country one way or another. And then when we finally settled in and did our real move down with our kids and our dogs and all that extra stuff, we went for a year without a car, and that worked okay. And we even lived in a small village where it was much more challenging. If you live in one of the cities, getting by without a car is pretty easy, even if you want to travel around the country, which we like to do. It's not that bad. There really are ways to do it that are affordable, whether it's public transportation or shuttles or private drivers. They're generally more affordable than owning a car. Everyone's situation is a little bit different. I've talked to people who run into some really weird driving situations, because we have these discussions a lot. So I talk to a lot of people who are on the fringes of what driving would be. But in general, I would say about 80 to 90% of the time, you're going to have a cheaper time, if not a more more convenient time, by not owning your own vehicle and relying on some combination of public transportation and private drivers. It may feel expensive using a taxi or private driver for a lot of things, but when you compare it to an entire month of owning a car versus just a few times, typically, of using a driver, often it is going to be cheaper to have the driver. And if it comes anywhere close, you generally want the driver. It's just more flexible. What if you decided to go on vacation? Those costs just go away. When you own a car, not only do you have the ongoing cost of paying for the car or maintenance on the car or whatever, you also then have the security of the car that you have to worry about, things you don't have to worry about in other circumstances. That being said, let's talk about what people often consider doing and what makes sense. Now, in today's discussion, someone, presumably from North America, mentioned the word drove in the context of, I wish we would have drove. And this is, I don't know, we didn't dig into what they meant, and they didn't continue the conversation. So I don't know exactly what they were meaning, if it even meant drove from North America. Maybe they meant they just wish they had driven themselves rather than hiring a driver. Could be anything, but it brings up an important point because people ask about this with relative frequency, and that is, well, couldn't I just drive from North America? And I do promote this as an idea quite often for bringing your pets down, because flying can be so difficult with many pets that driving down and bringing them stage by stage, always in your possession, where you're able to take care of them all the time, often that is a good way to go. So I'm not, disadvocating driving. It's just, I think it should be contextualized well. You don't want to do it too casually, but taking care of your pets, like my Mia, who's just in the bush behind me, is something that is anything but casual, right? Being able to bring your furry children is one of the most important things that you will do, and so that's the opposite of casual. But when it comes to simply, well, I'd like to be able to have a car and be able to drive around, so let's talk about this just a little bit, because we certainly entertained this option when we came down. First of all, we're going to assume you're coming from the US or Canada. Most other places can't really consider driving, or they're super close. Like, well, if you're from Honduras, of course you're going to drive. It's a 2-hour drive, right? But assuming you're coming from North America, like if you're coming from Europe, you can't drive. Coming from Australia, you can't drive, right? So we're assuming the US or Canada. Assuming you're coming from the southern US, like Texas, like us, the drive is estimated to take about 56 hours. So let's think about this real quickly. 56 hours of drive time. That doesn't include all the times that you have to stop and sleep. So you've got hotels that are adding up. You've got fuel during all that time. You have some risks. It's really not as risky as people make it sound. Lots of people do this drive without a problem, but it's not without risks, and you need to be somewhat aware of what's going on. Every country that you pass through, you're going to need to tip in. That is the temporary import permit for your vehicle. Plus, you're going to have your own visas, but those are generally trivial to the point where we don't have to worry about it. But those times are changing. That may be a little bit more difficult these days than it used to be, but you're really only worried about Mexico, and you generally can drive through Mexico without a problem. But coming into Mexico, you're going to have to get that first temporary import permit. That means paperwork, time, and money. And then you're going to have to do the same thing at Guatemala, and then the same thing at Honduras for sure, and possibly the same thing in El Salvador. If you want to take the safer, faster route through El Salvador, you'll have to do an extra tip. If you want to take the more dangerous, and this is the one part that is kind of dangerous, drive through the bits of more dangerous parts of Honduras, you can avoid one of the tips, but you're doing that instead, and the roads tend to be a bit rougher up there. Not always, but tend to be. And then you've got to tip into Nicaragua. At the end, doing all that, you can get your vehicle here, but you only get 30 days with a vehicle in any of those countries. Most of them, it doesn't matter because you're driving right through. But when you get to Nicaragua, you're on a 30-day clock. Now, you've just spent presumably 2 weeks driving down. Very few people can do that drive in much under 2 weeks. 56 hours of drive time is an awful lot. If you say 24 hours of drive time, people like me are like, I can do that in a single shot, and I probably can't. That was my youth. But imagine that I could. Even when I was young, there was no way I could do it twice at once, and 56 hours is more than twice at once. It catches up with you, right? You do one 24-hour drive, you need at least 24 hours of sleep to recover from that in any way, shape, or form. And the next 24-hour segment that you do will be harder than the first one, because you will not have recovered that much, and you'll be that much more burned out. And then you still got to do quite a bit left at the end. That's like another 8 hours at the end of that, and plus all the other things. No way. It's no way you're doing that in under a week. And that would be pushing it to the extreme if you're super young. Maybe if you have a group of drivers and you're sleeping in the back seat, it's going to be hard, right? We are not talking. So assume 2 weeks to drive down. Now you've got a 30-day clock on your time in Nicaragua. If you want to stay over those 30 days, you got to cross a hard border. Now for cars, you could go a number of places, right? I believe you can just take a car into Honduras or Costa Rica. I don't think you're limited to Costa Rica like you are with people. So because this is not the 90 or 180-day human clock. This is your car's tip clock that you're worried about. But so let's assume, though, you're going to go into Costa Rica because you're visiting the country and it makes sense. So you go into Costa Rica, you have to pay to tip into Costa Rica, then you got to return to Nicaragua and tip back into Nicaragua. That is not a fun process. And this is assuming you have a normal card that lets you do this relatively easily, which most people will, but not always, right? And so you're driving around Nicaragua, you've got all of that time that you spent to get down. You've got this potential risk of needing to tip out and tip back in to keep your car up to date. You've got the cost from each of those things. Those things add up, and none of these are adding benefits, right? If you were to have rented a car for a month or done all this drive to have a car for a month, yes, you have your own car. You didn't have to buy one or rent one, but you have so many miles to pay for, so much time that you have to use, and so many tip fees that you have to deal with, so many border crossings that you have to deal with, so many risks to take care of. You're talking about a really rare circumstances where this could anyway be cheaper. If you were coming for a month, you would assume that you'd have half a month drive down, 1 month driving around the country, half a month to drive back. And that's if you're going to Texas. If you're coming from Alaska or, the Yukon or something like that, this would be so much worse. There would be so much expensive driving. Plus, we're not including all the time you got to stay in hotels. We're not thinking about all the gas you got to spend to get down. You're never going to save money. Here in Nicaragua, you would be better off either renting a car in Nicaragua and driving yourself around during that time after having flown in, or hiring a driver to drive you around. You have some options. At the end of the day, I don't know that there is a cheap way to have your own vehicle in a country temporarily for this kind of amount of time that you would need to do this kind of investigation, to drive around so much and see the country and to take lots of people with you. It's just going to be kind of an expensive thing. Now, I did live in Romania for a while. I rented a car for 3 months. I managed to get a really good deal on it, but that was the EU, right? And sometimes you're able to get very cheap cars in the EU. That's one of the lowest cost car rental locations. But I also rented it for 3 months to get a really good deal, and still had to pay for a lot of things to be able to drive. Constantly we were paying extra insurance. Constantly we were paying for gas, of course, and so forth. So it wasn't the huge savings that it might have been, and we may have done cheaper having not had a car. But when I've lived in Latin America, I basically never rent a car because it is quite expensive throughout Latin America. That is just reality. So from one perspective, that is a thing to budget. If you feel you're going to have a car to have the freedom that you want, and you're unable or unwilling to use private drivers or other forms of transportation, then it easily could be a relatively large expense. So you just need to plan for that, right? If this is something that is a luxury or a need that you have for one reason or another, then it's simply a matter of budgeting for it, and that's fine. But there are alternatives, and Nicaragua really pushes for people not to use cars in a general sense. Nothing personal. They're not going after expats or anything like that. It's just they're not really looking to encourage more cars being on the road, so they're not going to do things to make it cheaper or easier. If anything, they're going to do the opposite. What they really want you to do is use public transportation, which is not for everyone for sure, but then when not doing that, they're hoping that you're going to use the taxi and private driver infrastructure, which does help create jobs, so they like that as well, but not as much as public transportation. You can get pretty much everywhere in the country that you need to go by bus, but that doesn't work for a lot of people who want to do sightseeing, or more importantly, people who are investigating where they want to live. I 100% understand the need here, right? This is a situation where you really need to be able to explore. You need to be able to see a back road, be like, I'm going to drive down there, and then as you're going, be like, I'm totally changing my mind. This isn't the town that I thought it was, right? I go to Esteli and it's way too flat. I didn't realize Esteli was flat. I want a mountain town. Like, that feels like a mountain town. Screw this. We're going on somewhere else, and just haul on out of there, right? That's the kind of stuff you do when you're driving yourself, when you have a driver, when you're having a bus. You can't do those things, or you don't do those things, right? I totally understand. Like with a driver, maybe you could, but you're probably not going to. You're giving them a final destination. They're going to drop you off there. But when it's you yourself, you're just like, I'm just going to drive around, take whatever road, go wherever, the world encourages me to go, and I'm going to stop when I find a hotel. That's how I drive in the U.S. a lot of the times, or at least I used to. When I was younger, and there's no reason you can't do that in Nicaragua. Harder, for sure, because there aren't very many hotels, but you can do those things and just explore, see where the winds take you, right? And that's really, really fun and interesting. And when you're looking for a place to live, maybe that's what you need to do. So I get that. So I think for people who need that kind of adventurous exploration, there's a number of factors, right? One, do you want to do it that fast? Maybe you just want to do that for a really limited amount of time, and not spend a ton of time doing that. Maybe you want to find a place that's good enough, rent for a while, and slowly explore over a period of time, say 6 months to a year. I think a lot of people push. I think there's a happy middle ground, right? You want to do a survey of the country and get enough to be like, mountains, ocean, north, south, big city, small town. and get that stuff under your belt, and then be like, okay, where do we want to base for a while and learn more about it, and kind of, I think that's kind of the general happy medium. And it's really tempting to either jump in and be like, I'm going to just imagine that a town I've kind of picked randomly out of my backside is going to be the place I want to live permanently. We get a lot of that, right? People who are just like throwing darts at a map and going, which words have I heard? I'm sure that's the place I want to live for forever. No, I'm not going to look at it. What could go wrong? Or the opposite, I want to come in and do this unbelievable investigation and just go crazy and then make a relatively quick decision about permanency after doing a really heavy research thing, which is definitely better, but still, I think, unless necessary, a bad balance. I think that it takes time to get to know the culture, to understand how you're going to fit into it. So I recommend to people that you do some amount of quick survey, enough to make a decision about your next 6 to 12 months, then get some semi-permanence, get to know an area, use that to explore and learn more about the country, the culture, and different things, and figure out how you fit into it. That is where I think most people go wrong, but it is the most reliable method. I think you will quickly build up a set of knowledge about the country that allows you to make really good decisions. And there's a lot of like little out of the way places that you'll never hear about until you've spent time here, right? And there's a lot of like, you'll run into people and be like, well, this isn't my favorite town, but I love the people here, so this is who I want to be around. Or I like for us, we've discovered that Managua is something we use all the time. And originally we'd have been like, I'm sure we'll go, but we're never going to spend time in Managua. Totally wrong. We spend time there all the time. It's where my kids like to go because it's the big city. And we were not picturing it as having the kinds of resources that it does. And we were picturing other places as having more than they did. Just we've learned more about ourselves. So that we live under 2 hours from Managua is an important thing for us. And we use it constantly. In fact, we're there 3 times this week. Not me, but my family. And so that it's just normal. Right? That you're going to change how you see the country. You're going to change how you behave. Your behavior within a place will alter over time. So that, as a general thing, I think is a good way to look at making those decisions. No matter what, if it's temporary, I think driving down, which of course you can do if it's just something you really want to do, is not something that is practical. It will never make sense from a practical standpoint. The time, the money, the risks, it's too much to ever justify it from a financial perspective. Well, it's going to save me money. It's not, right? You'd be better off renting a car at $100 a day indefinitely than doing that, and that'll be far easier and give you more protections, right? You'd have more insurance or whatever. In many cases, you can hire a driver for less, though, and that's really the thing that I think people miss, is how good hiring a driver is, or if you're going to do car rentals, doing it for only part of your time. But not everyone can do that. Everyone has a different situation, so I totally understand. But don't overlook what having a driver can mean for you, because, for example, if you're going to be based in Managua, which is a good place to be based if you're exploring the whole country and you want to go from place to place, and you, even assuming you never want to take public transportation, by hiring a driver, you could spend some time in Managua. You don't need a driver on the days that you're going to be staying there. Then you want to go to Matagalpa. Well, you have a driver to take you to Matagalpa, but you may not need a driver while you're there, or at least not a driver every day. So you may spend 2 or 3 days in Matagalpa exploring the city on foot, and then have a driver take you to San Rafael del Norte from there, or maybe you take public transportation, right? Or maybe you just hire a taxi to do it, depending on what the costs are, what's convenient, and you only pay for a driver and a car on the days when it's needed, and you don't have to worry about things like, well, it's hard to rent a car in most of the places that aren't Managua or Granada, right? Those towns have car rentals. A lot of places do not. San Juan del Sur does as well, but like here in Leon, super hard to rent a car, and often, even if we as Leonese rent a car here, we bring it in from Managua in most cases, all right? And people will drive them in. That's how close it is and how expensive it is to do things outside the capital. So what you would often do, you're in Matagalpa for a few days, your driver goes home. When you're ready, you're like, hey, I need a driver tomorrow. They'll drive up early in the morning, grab you, drive you for the day, maybe spend the night in Matagalpa, and then they'll go home the next day or go home that night, or whatever makes sense based on your schedule. And you'll only have to pay for that car and driver on the days that you're doing things. But it also gives you a driver who's out to do the right. They know how to navigate, they know how to park, they know what roads they can go down, and all kinds of things, and they'll deal with any of those things that come up, like police stops, which are not a big deal, but if you don't live here, it can be scary. You don't know what to do. It's just something that you don't necessarily want to deal with on a vacation or a short-term exploration. Just don't make that a thing. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to budgeting, right? This is going to be more expensive than a lot of people picture. We kind of imagine, especially if you're coming from North America, that life is expensive, restaurants are expensive, hotels are expensive, and cars, rental cars are a percentage of that. And when you come to Nicaragua, what you quickly find out is that, well, of course, if you think about it, but why would anyone? Cars cost the same here as they do anywhere else. We're all importing them from somewhere, right? A Toyota in the US and a Toyota here both have to be shipped in from Japan. They both have to go in the boat. They both have to, right? So they're really close in price. Now, technically, we can get cars cheaper here now, but that's a relatively new thing that hasn't really filtered its way through the system yet. So our prices are coming down. American prices are going up. So we're starting to diverge in a good way for us, but it's a new thing. Cars that are actually out there for rent, cars that are being used as taxis, they were purchased at the same prices. And we have to get the same parts, do the same repairs. Now our mechanics are cheaper here, but our fuel's more expensive. At the end of the day, and we have this really high problem of people bumping into each other. It's bumper cars out there. You're not in any real danger per se, right? Put on a seatbelt, have an airbag, you're in great shape. One of the reasons that car accidents are so dangerous here is that people are not wearing seatbelts. Almost no one is wearing a seatbelt when they're out driving the highway. That's why people die so much. People walk out and get hit by your car because they don't look, or they actually look and jump in front of you, right? These things happen constantly. So you're always in a situation where you're worried about bumping into things as a driver. But if you're driving at a reasonable speed and you're wearing a seatbelt, you're really, really safe compared to even driving in the US. So from that perspective, it's fine. But there's just a lot of overhead to doing those things that you don't have to deal with if you have a driver. And so quite often that's what we consider. But when you're looking at that insurance number, those insurance numbers tend to be high because they're constantly having to repair cars. Now, it's not huge repairs, but there's, you know, bumps here, scratches there, broken windows here, whatever. And so the insurance cost tends to be on the high side because of the bumper car thing. But if you own your own car, you can get a used car, a car you don't care about, and you don't care about those scrapes and little dings because it's just life here, right? So then owning a car here can be relatively inexpensive unless you're concerned about those things. Then it gets to be optionally more expensive, but rentals kind of have to deal with that. So that's one of the reasons why a rental car here is not really the cost-effective thing that you imagine it would be coming from like the US, where a good meal in the US might cost more than a car rental for a day. Here, a car rental is often going to cost 2 or 3 or 4 times a good meal, even though the overall cost is very similar. Now, like I said, sometimes you can get deals, but a lot of times you have to be here for a while in order to get those deals or to know where to find them. It's not like the US where you can just walk into a big car rental strip center and just pick the one with a good price or look online and get a good price. That's very hard to do here. So we have different challenges. And I think at the end of the day, which I've said a bit here, the expense for seeing the country is higher than people anticipate, and that's something you just have to budget for if that's something you want to see in that way. For those of us who use buses and so forth, it's really cheap to get around. But if you, let me tell you, as someone who films and wants to take camera gear and store stuff, like I want to take my car most of the time. It is super convenient because I have gear that I need to be able to work with in order to do the show whenever I travel, which has been a while that I've been unable to do that. But that's stuff that I totally understand. But the way that most of us, if we're just going to another city, taking a bus, we can get most places for just a few dollars. And that is why the rentals stay so expensive. There isn't much pressure to bring them down in price. But hiring a driver, while an expense, is often the answer to a lot of things. So you don't need to have them every day, and they deal with a lot of the overhead, and it just ends up working out better. There's no magic bullet here. I wish I had a great answer. It's like, okay, you got a family of 4, you need a vehicle, here's the thing you do, and it'll solve all your problems. I don't have one of those. This is one of those things that's a little bit hard. And if you're looking at it in reverse, you're going to the United States, you have to see the entire country. You've never been there, and you need to drive around with your family and do a survey of the country over the course of a month or two, and you're driving from New York to California to Texas to Oregon to Florida and Chicago, and being like, what do we like, what do we not like, which food, like, it takes time in every location. Now it's much more driving, but you get the point. That would be expensive and difficult too. The car rental would be more straightforward and less expensive per day, but the overall theory of if this was something you were doing in the US, you would expect it to be a difficult and expensive process. It is here too. Just the balance of things is a little bit different. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. Hit that thumbs up. If you would like to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott L. Miller. It comes directly to me. It's like Patreon. Helps support everything that we do here. We have a ton of expenses, and it really does help a lot. And of course, if you would share this on social media, tell someone about the show. That would do a lot to promote us. And you can help by just watching another episode. That makes a big difference. And I will see all of you tomorrow.